All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review. Today we're continuing our RBT practice exam series where we're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. If you're looking for our proven study materials, check out btexamreview.com. 3 practice exams, our task list study guide, and of course our famous combo pack. When you pass your exam, make sure you let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Other than that, let's work hard, study hard, get to our questions. Dave is given a new case as a behavior technician. He has never met this client or their parents before. Dave shows up on time with proper materials and introduces himself. He then tells the client to sit down in the chair and get ready for work. What has Dave done incorrectly? This is requiring you to put yourself in the shoes of a behavior technician arriving at a new case for the first time. So you need to think about, what do I need to be sure of when I'm meeting a family for the first time, when I'm meeting a client for the first time, when I'm getting ready for my case. Because Dave, he shows up on time, he's got his materials, he introduces himself, but then he tells the client to sit down and get ready for work. So what has he done wrong here? A, Dave needs to prepare for session before arriving. Well, based on the information, it seems like Dave was prepared, right? He had the proper materials, he showed up on time, he seemed ready to go. B, Dave needs to gather necessary materials prior to session. Again, by all accounts, based on the information given, Dave was ready for session. He had the materials he needed. What he didn't do was C. Dave needs to build rapport with the client. Remember, rapport is that relationship you build with the client and with the client's family. A good rapport is going to go a long way as far as establishing yourself as a reinforcer and as someone that the client wants to learn from. Dave walking in on a brand new case and telling the client to sit down and work is not building rapport. Dave has to go through the steps of building a relationship first. And then D, Dave has done nothing wrong. Well, Dave showed up properly. He was ready. He was prepared. He was just in too much of a rush. Dave needs to spend time building rapport with this client before they get into all the work stuff. 2, if you're going to be using massed practice in a discrete trial teaching procedure, what are some ways you can avoid reinforcer satiation? All right, there are a lot of different terminology going on in this question. Just don't be overwhelmed. When we see terminology, we do our best to define it, and it's going to make it easier and us more fluent. Mass practice is basically running the same trial over and over again in DTT. We're using discrete trial teaching, right? Clear beginning and clear ending. And then we're trying to avoid reinforcer satiation. What do we mean by reinforcer satiation? We mean the reinforcer has either been given too much or given too often, and it's lost its effectiveness. The learner no longer wants it. They're satiated on it. Remember, we have deprivation where you're not getting enough. We have satiation, which is the opposite. You've gotten too much. It no longer holds value. So if we're going to be using mass practice, how are we going to avoid that issue of satiation? We don't want that reinforcer to lose its effectiveness because it's been used too much. A, use a token system. Sure, if we use a token system, then instead of giving that same reinforcer every time, right, we're giving tokens, which they can then exchange for the reinforcer. A is a good answer. Do we pick it and move on? We don't. We read all of our answer choices. B, restrict certain reinforcement only to discrete trial training. Absolutely. This is a great strategy to use if, let's say, your client is picky with reinforcement. Only allow access maybe during work time, right? The value of that reinforcer is going to stay high. C, fade reinforcement appropriately. Absolutely, right? If we're starting on a continuous schedule of reinforcement, eventually we need to start fading that to make it more variable and make the response cost higher, right? Or the response requirement, I should say, higher. All 3 of these are good ways to avoid that satiation of the reinforcer to where the reinforcer is being given too much. Using a token system, restricting it, and then fading it are all great strategies. So what can we do to avoid reinforcer satiation? Well, D, all the above. Greg is supposed to be at dinner with his wife and her family after work. He leaves work at 4 p.m. and drives 30 minutes to the store. It takes him 15 minutes to pick up the gift at the store and then 30 minutes to get to the restaurant. What is the total duration Greg spent getting to dinner? Pretty straightforward question. All it's testing you on is your ability to find a total. And when we're finding totals or averages, we need to be sure we are looking at the right measurement. In this case, they want us to find total duration. So we need to add up all the durations, right? Total is easy. You just take all your measurements and add them together. In this case, duration. So we're taking all of our durations, just adding them together. Very straightforward. So let's pick out our durations. Greg leaves work at 4 p.m. and drives 30 minutes to the store. There's our first duration. It takes him 15 minutes to pick up the gift at the store. So there's our second duration. So 30 plus 15 is 45. And then 30 more minutes to get to the restaurant. So all in all, 30 minutes to the store, 30 minutes to the restaurant is 60. 15 more minutes to pick up the gift at the store is 75. Simply put, that's our total. So what was the total duration Greg spent getting to dinner? Not 30, 15, or 45 minutes, but 75 minutes. Pretty straightforward question. Total questions and average questions, not complicated. Don't make them harder than they need to be. Which of the following is the best example of imitation? All right, basically a definition question disguised as an application question, right? What is imitation? Imitation is copying in the moment a behavior of a model, right? Pretty straightforward. I think we all are pretty familiar with what imitation is. You're just copying the behavior of something in front of you, okay? The topography needs to be very similar, right, for it to qualify as imitation, but that's essentially what it is. So the question wants to know, or wants us to find, the best example of imitation. A mom watches a video on how to make mashed potatoes. She later makes mashed potatoes from memory. Is the mom imitating in the moment how to make mashed potatoes? No. She watched a video, then later on she goes and makes them on her own from memory, not copying anything she's seeing. Okay? So A is not really imitation. It's not a great example of imitation. B, a toddler watches their dog bark, and then the toddler meows like a cat. Well, is the toddler imitating the dog barking? No. Now, the topography doesn't necessarily need to be one-to-one identical, but it needs to be similar. Meowing like a cat, barking like a dog is not similar enough to qualify as imitation. C, the teacher puts her finger over her mouth and says, shh. Class puts their fingers over their mouths and say, shh. Excellent, right? Perfect example of imitation. The class is imitating the teacher, putting her finger over her mouth and saying, shh. D, I jump up and down on one foot while the learner spins in circles. While I'm jumping, the learner's spinning. They're not imitating any form of jumping. Which of the following is the best example? Well, C. The teacher puts her finger over her mouth and says, shh. Class imitates by putting their fingers over the mouths and saying, shh. The day before Christmas, Dad wraps all of his son's presents in Superman wrapping paper and all of his daughter's presents in Barbie wrapping paper. This will most likely help the children do what? All right, pretty straightforward, I think. If we're thinking about our presents, these are the stimuli. And Dad is doing what? Well, he's marking one with Superman wrapping, and he's marking the other with Barbie. So when the kids run downstairs, they see presents. They're going to see some presents with Superman and some with Barbie. What are the children going to be able to do? A, discriminate between presents. Yes, remember, discrimination is also called stimulus discrimination, where you're telling the difference between stimuli, and they're telling the difference between presents here. Differentiate between presents. Remember, differentiate is also response differentiation. Differentiation refers to choosing different responses. The responses are going to be the same, right? They're going to pick their presents. They're going to open them. They need to be able to discriminate, though, between those presents or the stimuli. Functionally communicate. There's no indication of any communication going on in the question. There's no information regarding functional communication, so that's out. And then D, comply with instructions. Well, we're not sure if they'll comply. Only thing we can be sure of is identifying the presents differently with wrapping paper is going to help with discrimination. So what is this most likely going to help with? Well, discriminate between presents. I'm using a momentary time sampling procedure. The interval is set at 10 seconds. The behavior occurs for 9 seconds, 10 seconds, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and 1 second. How many responses do I have? Careful here. Slow down. This is a good time to remind you, you have to go slow, okay? Accuracy is what produces speed. Speed does not produce accuracy. Remember that. So we are using a momentary time sampling procedure, meaning the behavior has to occur at the end of the interval. The interval is set at 10 seconds. So the behavior has to occur at 10 seconds, 20 seconds, so on and so forth, right? Every 10 seconds, we're looking up, is it occurring? Well, we know the behavior occurred for 9, 10, 2, 3, and 1 seconds. Does that tell us anything about when the behavior occurred? If it occurred at the end of the interval? It doesn't. It just tells us how long the behavior occurred for. So how many responses do I have? Well, it's unclear. We know you have at least one, but the behavior could have occurred for 1 second at the end of the interval, which would have been 2. We could have up to 5 here, right? We're just not sure. We need more information. And what information do we need? We need the information regarding when did these behaviors occur? Did they occur at the end of the interval? Because if they didn't, they're not going to be responses. This is a tricky question, okay? It really forces you to read. It's been getting a lot of good feedback lately from people who pass. And what they're saying is you really need to slow down and focus and read, really read the questions, okay? You have to understand what the question is asking you. In this case, how many responses do I have? We're not sure. We need more information to determine that answer. Fill in the blank. Blank occurs when the response removes an aversive stimulus. Blank occurs when the response prevents the presentation of an aversive stimulus. Now, you might not see a question like this, but we need to practice, okay? This is a good practice question. Let's break it down. This happens when the response removes an aversive stimulus. Well, think in your head, because behavior happens for a reason. So if a behavior is removing an aversive stimulus, what are they doing? Well, they're escaping, right? You could also put when the response escapes an aversive stimulus. And then blank occurs when the response prevents. So the difference here, one removes, one prevents. So A, escape, automatic. Well, we know the first one is escape, right? Escape occurs when the response removes an aversive stimulus. Automatic, though, does not necessarily prevent the presentation of an aversive stimulus, right? Because automatic happens solo, happens on your own, happens by yourself. If we look at B, escape occurs when removes, yes. Avoidance occurs when the response prevents the presentation. Remember, escape, avoidance are considered pretty much the same function, but they do have some differences. Escape, you're removing a stimulus that was already presented. Avoidance, you're preventing that stimulus from being presented. Okay, understand the distinction. C, avoidance, escape. No, they're backwards. And then D, automatic avoidance. No, we know it's not automatic. So what we're looking for here is escape occurs when the response removes an aversive stimulus. Avoidance occurs when the response prevents the presentation of an aversive stimulus. You are a behavior technician working in a school with children with learning disabilities. Today, your principal assigns you a student with bipolar disorder. What do you need to be sure of before you start working with this student? This is an ethical question and something you need to consider as an RBT. There might be times as RBTs where you are asked to do things you might not be comfortable with, and you have to understand you have the power to say no. In this case, you're a behavior technician, you work with kids with learning disabilities. Today, they're telling you you need to work with someone with bipolar disorder. Two totally different things, two totally different skills, two totally different competencies. What do you need to be sure of before you start? A, that the student also has autism. Is ABA only for autism? It's not, right? So that is not a prerequisite for us helping people. B, that the student also has a learning disability. Well, not necessarily, right? Even if they have a learning disability on top of bipolar disorder, you still might not understand how to work with those kids. So before you work with them, you need to be sure you have the competencies to work with that student. That is the ethical thing to do. If you've never been trained and you're not sure, you need to find a way to get that training before you start working. And then D, the student has a history of ABA. No, not necessarily. You have to be sure you're competent to work with this student. You're competent that you can work with kids with bipolar disorders. If you or another behavior technician become aware of an event that you may need to report to the BACB, how quickly should you make the report? All right, kind of a rote question. It's an awareness question. You need to be aware of this number. So RBTs or behavior technicians are required to be familiar with things they might need to self-report. And when they do, how quickly do they have? 7 days, 30 days, 6 months, or company policy? Well, it's not company policy because it is in the BACB code. It's actually 30 days. So if you or another BT are aware of an event you need to report to the BACB, you have 30 days with them becoming aware to make the report. All right, fantastic. Check out btexamreview.com for our study materials. Questions, comments, please let us know. Like, subscribe. Let us know when you pass so we can include you in our shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.